Welcome to Futureproof Business. Smart strategies, real insights, and tools to lead and scale in a fast-changing world. Let's future-proof your success.
Welcome to the Futureproof Business Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. Today I have the honor of interviewing Jaze Bordeaux. Jaze, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me. Like I said, it's nice to see you here and just to connect in this platform. So I think we got some good stuff to talk about today.
Definitely. I'm very excited you're here. We had a really nice conversation before a couple weeks ago. So that's like, can you maybe share with the audience a little bit about yourself, like who you are and what you do?
For sure. Currently, I like to tell people I'm in the business of filmmaking, which we'll talk about a little bit today. I'm mostly known right now for a feature film we released last year called EFC, which was a women's mixed martial arts film. Ironically enough, if you want to look at the plot, I like to say it was a little bit of The Wolf of Wall Street meets Warriors type thing. For the most part, the film went on to receive a lot of international acclaim. It received over, I think, 30 international awards. Currently, myself and my team, we're working on a slate of films, mostly focused on sci-fi thrillers over the course of the next 10 years.
Can you maybe share with us, like, how did you get into filmmaking? Were you always into filmmaking, or did you do something before? What's the story behind that?
Ironically, I get asked that question a lot, and my background was more in finance until I like to say I got a call from the universe one day, literally, just a filmmaker calling me asking about financing a film slate, which got me curious to just investigate the industry and what opportunities were there as I started to just unravel, all the layers. Any industry, any business sector has the same layers. You look at what's the product, where's the market, which, in film would be the audience, where are the opportunities, where are the challenges, and then you kind of find your way from there. So I essentially went from one sphere into another, but took all my skills with me.
I mean, you're like a film like producer now, right? Did you like kind of work your way up to that level? Did you start like producing right away?
So essentially, when I started to explore and I wanted to as I said, I was curious about the industry because receiving a phone call and being asked some questions and thinking about it, I said, in all the industries I've looked at, from like manufacturing to this or recycle, whatever it was, coming from my finance background, I've never looked at the entertainment world. And I understood that it has a huge economic impact globally. It's not a small industry, it's gigantic. So, not knowing too much about it, when I just got curious and started to investigate, and we're talking, let's say this might have been 2008, 2009. I was looking back then, I said, come 2021, I realized the opportunity was going to be more in streaming. There'd be various platforms, streaming content. It was very obvious where the future was going then, even though maybe a lot of people couldn't conceive it because we weren't really streaming stuff online. It was like the age of Google video, which became YouTube. But it was very clear we're moving in this direction once the infrastructure is set up. So, just as any entrepreneur, they're looking for opportunities. You see a window and you try to position or prepare yourself for that. So, once that decision was made for me, in the sense that, okay, I see an opportunity, I think we can create products to match that opportunity. I decided to try to learn everything I could from the bottom up. So there was a period of time where I just leveraged a lot of contacts and networks I had, and I went and did whatever it was on set just to understand. So it didn't matter if it was producer's assistant or if it was a background on set or whatever it was, just to learn and understand the process of things and logistics. I did it for a few years because you have to. You really do. Especially if you're going to like create a product like a movie, You should understand how it works at all levels, whether it's from the smallest to the largest, so that you yourself know what you need to do moving forward when you're creating it. So I took every opportunity I could. It didn't matter what it was, just to understand and learn the business of it. No different than even when I decided to be a director, I did the same thing. I put myself in the actor's shoes. What are they doing? How do they do it? What's their process? What's their mythology, so to speak? And I just tried to learn what they do, and then I did it because I knew one day I would be in that position where I'm having to direct them. So I just needed to learn it myself, right? So I dedicated a lot of time just learning, understanding. And I think no matter what we do, it doesn't matter what industry, what sector, time is probably the most important factor to anything, because you do need that time to learn the skills to do things at a level where you can say, hey, this is financially rewarding for me. And the irony is, I think when I was a lot younger, when I was maybe 18, 19, somewhere 20 years old, so let's call it 25 plus years ago, I was at a conference. There was a speaker. He was like a self-made billionaire. And everyone was sitting there like on the edge of their seats, hoping he was going to give them like that, whatever that little secret sauce recipe was for success, that, you're going to take this today and you're going to go home and make it tomorrow and you're going to be an overnight success. He came out on stage and he said, if you're going to make it in business, it's going to take you 10, 15, 20 years. And I will add one thing to that, which I do. It's scary to a lot of people to think, oh my God, what do you mean 10, 15, 20 years? I will add one caveat to that, in the sense that with focus over the course of the year, you'd be amazed what you can accomplish and the momentum you can build. But it does take time just to get to that point where you've, acquired the skill and the experience just to do something at a macro level. Anyone who's actually, I think, made it never did it overnight. And even for me, people look at our recent film that came out last year, EFC, and we had a lot of challenges to get that film done. And one of the things I guess maybe a lot of people won't know, but they'll hear about it here on your podcast, Daniel, is that before we shot that film, and this was a film that was plagued with a lot of problems. Statistically, the percentages and the odds were against us to complete it. Even when we started, we were faced with probably the craziest weather in Canadian history, period, ever, to the point where our studio, it shut down, like the HVAC system. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. We had an actor that got sick and lost a third of the film. We were even told that independent productions like ours, I think 87% of them don't even make it through the production part, right? Yet alone when you get to post production, and then 50% of them don't even make it. And then the distribution part of it, the odds are even more staggering. However, what a lot of people don't know is that prior to that, there were other projects that, we tried to put out that didn't make it. And they're still on a hard drive somewhere, buried deep in a vault somewhere. But because of those other projects that didn't make it, we were able to get EFC done, which was probably the most challenging out of all the ones that we were trying to do at that time. So there's time, and time and momentum just to learn, build, understand. And the irony is, we do live in a time where everybody wants it like today, like in the next few minutes. That's largely what I hear sometimes. But the reality is, as much as the times are different, I'm finding that things haven't changed that much. It still takes time. It takes a lot of time to really hone in and focus on what you're doing and learn that craft. But it doesn't mean you can't build momentum over that period of time, right?
Was EFC a movie that people can go and see it somewhere streaming, or is it not out yet, like for people to watch?
Yeah, if you're in the States, it's available across all digital platforms, United States, Canada, UK, Mexico, Spain, a few other territories. It's
Or
still
is it
being
like on
rolled out.
Amazon or Netflix or
Uh,
Hulu?
if you're in the States, you can find it on Apple, you can find it on Amazon, you can also find it on Tubi, you can find it on DirecTV. You can just look it up or follow one of the pages, and very easy movie to find. It was commercially released last year, so it's literally available across all platforms. Not Netflix. Netflix has a different business model, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And but otherwise, it's a very easy film to find. And if you're in a market where it's not there, it'll probably be there sometime in the next year.
So what inspired you to create EFC? Because it's definitely like a different story. It's not, I mean, I've noticed like a lot of like movies are coming out in the last few years from Hollywood. I know you're not Hollywood, but like a lot of the movies that are really popular, like superhero, Superman just came out a few weeks ago. You took a really different angle. What inspired you to go with, like a different story?
EFC is interesting because it was never really in the plan, right? As I mentioned to you earlier, we have a film slate. We're focused on sci-fi thrillers. It was never really part of the plan, but just something happened. I think it would have been 2015, 2016, a moment of inspiration. And it was like, you know what? This type of film needs to go first. And it just kind of coincided with this rise with women in sports. Ronda Rousey was also like just starting to get big on a mainstream level. And going back and looking at it, it's okay. This speaks to your podcast today because sometimes in the world of film, we talk about like art, but also when you have a bit of a longer term strategic plan, sometimes you got to reverse engineer stuff, right? And we were looking at what can we put out that could have an immediate market connection. When you mentioned Superman, that's an IP that's obviously everybody in the world knows, right? You don't
Right.
really need a famous actor for it. You just put out a Superman movie and nobody's really asking you like what actors are in it. They know the character. They're already invested in the product, right? So when we were looking at that, said, you know what? Just the sport of MMA itself already has a built-in fan base, but we've never really, if you look at the drama sport movie genre, at that time, there hadn't been another women's mixed martial arts film done ever. So it was an opportunity to almost be like one of the first people to do it. And we got faced with a lot of challenges with that. Distributors told us that won't make any money. They didn't think there was a market for it. And I would say it hasn't been done before. And they would say there's a reason it hasn't been done because it's not going to make any money. But I didn't believe that because I do believe, just based on the research we did, that there's an audience that maybe wanted that. And there was also an audience that's interested in seeing women in these kind of non-traditional kind of roles. In other words, not the rom-com, not the girl next door, not the psycho drama thriller, but like in these other kind of roles. And we've had some female boxing films before, oh, and I'm talking about before 2016, very few, but I was convinced there was a market for it. And so we decided we're going to move forward with it anyways and just kind of prove it wrong because everything we were seeing says that there is a market. If you give them a reason to see this film, they're going to go see this film. A year after we announced that we were doing it, Halle Berry came out and said, "Hey, I'm making a movie called Bruised, and it's about women's mixed martial arts." And at that time, I was quite excited because I said, obviously, we're on the right track. And for us, I'm like, it's great that you would have a Halle Berry film coming out first, being the first one. And then ultimately, that film that she did is on Netflix called Bruised. And slowly, we noticed the zeitgeist was kind of changing a little bit. And EFC released in 2024. And one of the things I noticed around the time that we were releasing, we weren't the only ones. Like there's more films that were being announced and coming out kind of featuring women in these non-traditional kind of combat sport type roles. and it's opening up even more and more. So when I look back, I realized we were right. We were on the right trajectory. We were on the right track. And if we had any kind of influence at all, like just even a speck, just to help that move forward, that's what I'm probably most proud of.
So was this something you financed yourself, or did you go to investors?
Yeah. So in the business of filmmaking, with our projects, essentially, it's no different than any startup. We have to take the product, which is the story, and we have to package a financing plan around it. So it comes right back down to, okay, how much do we need? What is it going to cost to get to market? And how do we finance it? And based on how we're financing it, we know kind of what needs to happen. So this was actually financed outside of any studio system privately through private investors to move it forward. So that's why I said we were a little bit outside of the, what do you call it? At least in my backyard here in Canada, we were kind of outside the system. We were a little bit rogue. Financing here takes on many different forms, but we did it, ourselves. And essentially, like I said, it's one of the big questions that's always asked, I find, from filmmakers and people outside the circle. And for me, I always have to go back to, if you just take it and look at it as a startup, it would be no different than saying to Tesla, how did you finance your startup? They had to figure out, what their product was, where it's going, how much they need. Based on that, put a financing plan together, so forth and so forth.
So how did you approach like the budgeting from the film? What was that like easy to do, or is it like, yeah, was it kind of like tough to do?
For me, no, because again, part of the building up to that point and just getting the experience is also learning what scenes cost and why they cost that much, and essentially, and maybe what's needed, what's not needed. I think the biggest challenge is going to come when you're shooting like we were and having so many issues, and we're having to pivot and make adjustments to whatever the situation is at that time. So when you've budgeted, I don't know, let's say you have one scene, and essentially if you calculate all the actors, all the stunt people, everything, and then just say that one scene for that one day is going to cost you $20,000, and you have all these hoops and challenges, and you have to keep people overtime. And I think the biggest challenge is going to be, how do you navigate a lot of the potential overruns? And that is where I find is a skill in and of itself, right? Because again, as any leader in any organization, in any business, you have to understand how to pivot really fast, make quick decisions. They may not be popular, but decisions have to be made. So when I go back to EFC, what I guess people are going to realize this here on your podcast, we literally lost 1/3 of the movie. And a lot of the calls were being made on the day. But again, I'm looking at it, okay, we're going to have to drop these scenes. And as a result of dropping these scenes, we're going to lose the entirety of this sub story, which will save us XYZ amount of dollars, which allows us to actually shoot the other stuff that's probably driving the story more forward than not. That's where I believe the skill and the challenge comes in, is being able to pivot in those environments and in those situations, more than actually just budgeting. Because I can sit with anybody and walk through budgeting 101. Okay, there's basics. The unions have their rates already outlined with all fees and fringes, and you can start working through the whole thing essentially. But I find the real skill is going to come from what I just mentioned to you, which is, how do you pivot and what do you do when you're challenged? And this is essentially why maybe 87% of independent productions don't make it out of production when you're faced with, a lot of these scenarios. And essentially, I've never heard of a perfect film production, right? There's always just things that come up, human error, environments, climates, whatever it is, there's always something that's going on, just like any business. And it's just, I guess, how you're prepared for it and how you can respond to it.
So, can you explain, were there any unexpected costs? And what were like the lessons that you learned from doing all this, from like the, financing perspective?
I can tell you this, when you asked about unexpected costs, my DP, the director of photography, so the person responsible for shooting the film, Jason Romolo, it's interesting because he and we had a plan. And, as much as we planned and had to determine how we're going to shoot it and the way it had to go, we essentially had to take that plan and throw it in the trash on day one. Literally, because on day one, the problem started. Technical problems we had on day one. All of a sudden, we're doing a night shoot, and we were a unionized production, meaning that we have to follow, obviously, union standards. So on a night shoot, and we're having some technical equipment. So on the very first day, now we're forced to keep people there longer than they need to be, which means overtime. Now the numbers are going up a little bit. Now, I should say this, we did plan for things to go wrong. So we did plan to have some type of contingency fund just to make sure that we can account for whatever it might be, but we didn't expect all the issues that we were having, right? On day one, right away, boom, we were pivoting from the very first day of production, right? One of the most expensive parts of our production, if you watch EFC, we have a lot of stunts in the film, and stunts is different from like film fighting, where you have people just kind of like throwing some punches or falling, and it's kind of cut a certain way to give you a certain effect. We had women like we had a combination of like stunt actors, women that actually do like real stunts, like the type of stunts, you might be jumping off a motorcycle, right? And we also had MMA athletes, and we had to replicate a real fight situation in the cage. And they were literally doing, if you go back and watch the film, you'll see them doing like stunts. It was the most expensive aspect of the film, and rightfully. And even that was impacted. And essentially, the time that we had allocated to shoot it was almost cut in half. If we were going to shoot it over 10 days, we probably had, I can't even think off the top of my head now, half of that, whatever it was. And so, how do you account for that? So, we did go in prepared for some type of contingency, but at the same token, we got hit so much with so many things that we ended up going to multiple contingencies. So I had a contingency plan where, okay, if things happen and we're slightly over budget, how do we deal with that? And then if it gets contingency B, if it's really bad, then we have various ways to maybe finish financing this particular production, which we may need to do to get it to market, right? So we had a few layers in terms of planning, just as a contingency, like as it just in case. Okay, just in case this happens, then what? Okay, if it's worse than that, then what? And hopefully we never get to the third layer, but if it gets absolutely to this point, where do we go from here? And if it got anywhere below, let's say, that third layer we had designed, then I knew we'd probably have to abandon the project, right? So we did account for it, but yeah, we definitely got hit with a lot fast, immediately. And it was a test and resolve. And I saw a lot of people on my team work brilliantly under pressure. So again, part of doing anything is also the team that you have that makes all the difference. I think without that team, we definitely don't finish that production, but we did have a team that worked brilliantly under pressure, which might surprise some people, but that was one of the things I was actually most proud of as well on that production, just seeing how people responded to the pressure that they were under.
So how do you decide, when you're given like the budget, where to spend the money or where to cut back, and what do you decide to be as like non-negotiable? No, we have to do this in order for, for this to be like a good movie.
So for me, and there's various levels of it, especially on the independent level as a producer and director, I feel as though I have a grasp on exactly what's going on. Again, let's say if you went back to EFC, I knew when I put my producer's hat on, we're cutting this, cutting that, pivoting from this just to make room in a budget. But I also knew when I put my director's hat on where we can move the story and how we move the story forward. So on that production, it was me in both roles. Other productions, you might have a problem because the producers are needing to cut, redirect funds, budgets, and a director maybe doesn't understand how the financing works and is focused more on the creative. And then you have a difference of opinion, and then you end up with films that don't get done or go potentially way, way over budget for the most part. But if there's a team working collectively together, you can essentially almost figure it out. But obviously, when you're planning, like how we were planning for EFC, non-negotiable, even our distributor had said to us, no matter what happens, you make sure those fight scenes are completed. We knew that no matter what happened, we had to make sure we got those fight scenes done. A lot of things we can come back from and solve for story-wise, but those were going to be the most difficult to come back to. So we knew going into it what the most important thing was. On any other production, I think the most important thing is whatever's moving the story forward. The core elements that will keep that story moving forward. If there's a scene or a subplot that you can sit there and say, if I take this out, does it actually affect the film, the momentum, pacing, story, interest of the film? If it's no, objectively, you can look at that, then yeah, it's expendable. But if it's a core plot where it's, if I take this out, the entirety of the audience is going to be absolutely confused, you're going to have a problem. But on that note, sometimes you can't really let budgets constrain you. Again, I'll go back to EFC. One of the days we were shooting, and if you talk to any Canadian filmmaker and they talk to you about problems, you're definitely always going to hear about the weather every time. We had that issue on one of our days, and as I mentioned earlier, it was the worst snowstorm in Canadian history ever, in the history that they've been measuring weather. And so when our studio, the HVAC, everything, heating, everything gets blown out, we had a difficult situation because we had 8 pages that we had to get through with 4 actors on that particular day. And just to give you a bit of a comparison, you can pick any like film or TV show that you like on any of the platforms, Apple, Netflix, whatever. They're typically shooting like 3 pages a day. And so here we already had a challenge where we had to do 8. And then this happens, and we're being told, by the various unions that it's too cold where you are to actually do anything. If the actors agree to shoot this scene based on the temperature in your studio, then it's okay, but they're not mandated to do it because it was, I think, where it was probably -0 in there, but
Ah,
in that studio. And but the actors, they were seasoned and they were more than willing. So our challenge was this: how do you get through all of that material in this time frame that we have, which at that point might have only been like a few hours, 4 hours left. And there was no way to cut this one particular scene. It was so important to move the story forward that we could not cut it. So we had to figure out how to actually do it. Coming back was hard because, again, if you want to look at budgets, you have 4 actors, you have an entire crew, You have 8 pages of material, very expensive to come back and shoot. Got together with our DP and Jason and all the camera guys, and we were discussing it, and we came up with a plan. And we actually ended up, and keep in mind, this was a scene that was going to probably take us 2 days to go through. But based on the time constraint, we had to pivot. So we came up with a plan, and again, great team working under pressure, where we took the 4 actors, the 8 pages of material. We did a very long tracking shot. And I think we did it in 2 or 3 takes. It probably took us maybe 30 minutes. And it's one of my favorite scenes in a film. And initially, it was going to take us 2 days to do it. And then it looked impossible to do. And then you look at the constraints, and then you had no choice but to get creative with this scene, because there was absolutely no way to just say, okay, we can survive and just delete it and the film will be fine. It was one of the scenes where there was no way to actually cut it. So we had to get innovative and do something different outside the box.
What advice would you give for like other indie filmmakers that, they're trying to raise their first 10,000, 50,000, 100,000?
I talk to a lot of indie filmmakers, and typically they start off, I'm raising XYZ amount of money. Okay. And I'll say to them, all right, if you want to buy a house, right? There's a few ways to go look at it, depending upon what your situation is, right? There's a lot of different types of mortgages out there from different sources, banks, private lenders, like you name it, right? And with indie filmmakers, I like to tell them, look, you need to take your story and literally treat it like a startup. First and foremost, you need a financing plan around it, because it's hard to tell you how to go or give you advice on how to go raise 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is, without you having even developed a financing plan. Right? So it's, what type of money do you need? Are you needing equity investors? You need bridge money? Do you need it? There's no one size fits all, and that will change with every production. But essentially, as a filmmaker, you have to start there. So you have to think about, okay, once you get the budget done, now what type of financing do you need? And a lot of that's going to be based on the type of project you have, right? And the scale of the project. And there's a lot of energy, just again, any startup that needs to go into that phase of development. A lot of times it's skipped. It's a story, script, and I need to go to production tomorrow. But a good chunk of the cycle of the film is literally spent in the financing phase, just building the financing plan, figuring out how it's going to get financed. And it's hard to answer questions about how do I go raise this without asking all the other questions, and then once you've asked all the other questions, then you could probably get to a point where, okay, this is how I need to raise the money now. So my advice largely with filmmakers is, look, don't skip the initial phases. It needs a lot of time. It needs as much time as it took you to develop the script, right? Scripts sometimes with writers and filmmakers developing it over months and years. A financing plan needs just as much care and attention, because it's essentially like a roadmap for the financial life of the entirety of the movie, right? So I would suggest to them not to skip that and put a lot of attention and focus on that. And the best way to do it is to ask the right questions, right? Which is essentially, you got to start with what type of film this is, what scale it's at, what's needed for it. Realistically, where do you want to take it? Does it need big stars? There's so many questions. You just have to go through and ask, right?
So how do you pitch like a project to investors or partners that see both like the creative aspects of what you're doing and the business potential? Because to me, it's almost like two different sides.
It is, but it's really no different than anything else because when you're pitching it, yeah, you can pitch the creative side of it, but you're also pitching the outcome of it. Here's a film we want to do. Here's why we think we need to do it. Here's where we think it's going to go, and here's the returns we think it's going to make, and here's how we justified all of that. So you could be building Tesla cars. Let's say you were the early phases of it before Elon and you went to an investor and you're going to have to pretty much pitch someone, why do you think the market needs that car? Why now? And what's the long-term viability and what are the returns look like on this long term? It's no different for a film. For us internally, we usually start with a question, why this movie now? And we do that with everything that we're actively developing right now, essentially with our sci-fi slate. In that slate, we talk a lot about the things I know as society we're going to be focused on in the next few years, from AI to monetary system, various components that I know will be culturally relevant and still of interest to people. But essentially, we start, why this movie now? Why do people need to see this film? And why are they going to want to see this film? You know what I mean? So you do have to like go through that whole process. And again, it's no different than any other startup, except that in this business, every film is a startup. So you're constantly starting up a new startup, right? You get through one, you deliver it, and then you're doing it again, right? So to speak.
Did EFC incorporate like AI technology or something similar to that?
Now, that's an interesting question you have because it's fascinating to me. So when we shot this film and we got stuck in post-production during COVID, and it's been fascinating because it's only been a few years, really. If you think about 2021 to now, you're talking 4 years almost. The entirety of the industry changed because all of a sudden we couldn't do it how we were going to do it before. Our post-production plan also got thrown out the window and the industry adapted. I was watching the whole industry adapt in real time. And after a few years, I'd say right when we got to 2024, all of a sudden, I feel like the industry modernized. We were doing things just like how we're talking right now over Zoom. There's editing tools that are being done. You could be halfway around the world, and all of it, I could be there with the editor going through stuff. Give you another example, the music score that our composer did, that was conducted by the Prague Symphony Orchestra. And initially, he was supposed to be in Prague with them to record the music. But, during COVID, couldn't really travel there. And that changed in real time. Eventually, he was able to do it online with them. And so things really changed like very quickly. And kudos to the industries overall in general for just being able to adapt so quickly. And then most recently, we're seeing now this surge of AI tools. Even from a year ago to now, obviously the film's done, it's been released. If we had the film today, let's say in 2025, there are so many things we could have done to help compensate for all the areas that we fell short in because of all the complications that we had. Prior to now, there really was not a lot. The tools were basic. Sure, you can use maybe some AI tools for captioning or whatever, and it could be accurate, may not be accurate, but it really did a quantum leap, I feel, over the past 9 months in terms of capabilities with film and AI. Again, in 2023, 2024, what was available? Not a lot to really help us with what we were doing at the time. In 2025, we'd have an entirely different type of a movie if we were able to use some of the AI tools just to help us fill the gap in on the stuff that we lost. But it was just, it's so fast.
I mean, I'm just assuming that if he uses AI tools, will actually help bring production costs down, or am I wrong with that?
I'm of the mindset using AI and various AI tools will not only bring production costs down, it's going to help independent producers to also turn over quicker. Obviously, you're bringing costs down. You can get the films done faster, which you can get to market faster, which means investors get the return faster, which means you can circle over to new productions. I know that there is a conversation where there's a lot of fear around it, but I think there's different questions we need to be asking and a different way to look at it. I actually think all the tools, the innovation, AI is just going to help us produce more. And if we're producing more, that means there's more opportunities, right? Things are getting streamlined a bit, that's fine. But I think essentially what it's going to do, yeah, it will bring costs down, but it's going to create more opportunities, right? From that standpoint, you know.
Have you ever used either like crowdfunding or grants to support your film initiatives?
I have not, and simply because with our productions, there again, I go back to we talked about financing plans, right?
Yeah.
We have two features coming up that are going to be at a grander scale. Each production alone has a 30 million budget attached to it. Those programs work for certain types of projects, but they haven't really worked for what we've been doing or are about to do. Now, one thing that I bring up here that's utilized by everybody would be like tax credits. One of the reasons why there's so many things you're probably watching on the US side that were most likely shot here in Canada. And there's a reason for that. And that's because there's a system here in which you have these tax credits. So essentially, Daniel, you could be an American producer that comes here and you have a film with a budget of 10 million and half of that money you've spent on labor, and there's a program here to give you basically a good percentage of your costs back. So it helps to reduce the cost of your production. That's a key financing tool anywhere in the world for any productions, depending on the country and governments that are involved. That factors in a lot into financing plans. Even in the States, there's a lot of states that are really progressive about that, like the state of Georgia, for example. It's one of the reasons why a lot of the film productions in the States has gone there is because they implemented a system where producers can take advantage of that, right? So that's a key factor in financing plans. There are, again, we talked a lot about financing plans, I feel like, in this episode. And when it comes to grants and public money and stuff like that, there's no one size fits all. You just have to, once you put that plan together, determine, does that work or not? Does crowdfunding work or not? What's the project? There's so many ways to go about doing it. And it's just having that strategic plan. For us, again, we have a broader strategic plan. So it's just different in the sense of what we're doing with our projects, right?
I mean, can you maybe share with us, like in the audience, about some of the financial lessons you learned, not just on EFC, but also some of your past projects that are shaping how you're going to do like your future projects?
Some of the past lessons you said. I recently heard James Gunn on an interview. Obviously, he's making the circuits with Superman, and a lot of pressure on him, I know, just because of the history with the studio. And I know they needed this film to be really successful. And I think he had gotten asked a similar question, and I chuckled because I agreed with them. They were talking about the future of theatrical exhibition, theaters. Will people still be going to the theaters 5 years from now? And he essentially said, of course they are, if you give them a reason to go. And which means, he said, that, if you're going into production, you need to go into production with a finished script. And essentially, he kind of said with the finished plan, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we're seeing were probably scripts that weren't finished or finalized before they went into production. And one of the things you asked me, what I've learned the most is I don't think you really need in any production, not just like that solid final script product, but you really need a good plan with some contingency. So if you're asking me what have I learned, I've learned to go to production with the most solid script you can possibly have with multiple layers of contingency plans. You know,
That's really smart. And I guess, it comes with the territory of doing like film productions. Like you need to have contingencies. But I guess you said that you learn over time
it
to put those contingencies in, because as you said, things happen that you're not aware of, like the HVAC system goes out.
yeah.
What do you do now?
Yeah. You would be surprised, or most people would be surprised how often that happens. And it's more often than not. And even for us, before we went to production with EFC, like our dates, I moved it at last minute. I think we were essentially going to go to production. I don't remember what month it was. And I said, wait a minute, this script, we can't go to production with the script. Let's throw it out, cancel everything, boom, push it out 6 months, and let's put together a script that if we're going to do this and that we're confident in, right? But that's me and our team on a very small scale. On a bigger scale, I've heard stories like you probably heard of Gladiator, right? The stories I've heard about that film at the time in 2000, that was a $60 million production that didn't have a script when they went to production. But you did have a good director, I guess, in Ridley Scott that knew what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. But when I hear interviews with Russell Crowe, who says, we just kind of made it up as we went along. He said it was absolutely nuts. We weren't really sure what we were going to do the next day. We just kind of brought everybody and just kind of went with it. And I mean, again, speaks to the director, right? Because he ended up with obviously a film that stood the test of time. But it's not something a lot of people can pull off, put it like that.
So, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the production, but I'm curious to know, do you have a separate budget for like marketing of the EFC film, or do you just kind of hoping that you put it up on Apple, Amazon, and people are just going to find it? And
Typically, most films will have a production budget and then they'll have a marketing budget, which the general rule of thumb could be 20 to 30% of whatever the budget was, right? So it is part of the financial plan in terms of not just the production budget, but also the promotion and advertising budget. As well, a lot of the marketing you're doing way before you maybe even got to production or during production, but they are separate budgets that you do have to plan for, right? So with EFC, the thing is, before it even came out, before we even went to production, we actually started marketing the film. And we did do a lot of groundwork and we did spend money largely to show distributors, hey, there is market interest here. Look at all the data that we've compiled, right? Look at all the interest we've got on social media. So obviously for us, once we had the concept and we knew what we wanted to do in development, yeah, we started to put a budget together for marketing, just, to put stuff out there, press releases, social media stuff. You've got to create images, posters, this, a lot in development, right? And I shouldn't call it marketing expense because that's technically considered developmental expenses, but there is that you have to budget for too, right? Not just production and post production and advertising and all the stuff, but you do essentially have to do that. I know some at the larger scale, sometimes the distributors, the big guys, the Sonys of the world will invest that money into it. But one way or the other, somebody's paying for it, right? And even if the filmmaker isn't directly paying for it, they're still indirectly paying for it because that's coming out of their proceeds, right?
I mean, you talked about like you have a really great team that really, helps support, make the project happen. I mean, what's like the process of creating a great team on a project like this? And I mean, I'm assuming that requires a lot of great skill, right? Finding who are the right people to bring on to make sure the film, can be completed, be successful.
Yeah. There's definitely two streams. On the creative side, obviously, that's huge. And one of our key creatives, I'll say, I talked about our DP. He and I met on another production that I was producing. And this speaks to what I had mentioned before. Actually, we didn't meet on that production. He was referred to me because that production, we were going through it, and I looked at it and said, "This will not ever see the light of day." And there was recommendations made to me by, I think it was our sound recordist, who said, "Hey, I know you're really disappointed with the DP on this production. I have my really good friend. I've known him from film school. You got to reach out to him. He can maybe come and fix your production." For me, I said, I will reach out to him, but not about this. And Jason and I, we had met before. We've done little things. We had gotten to know each other. We got to the point when we were going to EFC. We had such chemistry where I could almost think something and he knew exactly what it was that I needed to do. It wasn't really a situation where we had to go back and forth and bicker about this or that. It's almost like I could say half the sentence, he got it, he knew it. So there's something there just in going through the motions when we talked about just being prepared and taking time to learn the craft. There's people that come with you for that, and he was one of them. And one of the most important things when you're doing a women's mixed martial arts film is who's your stunt coordinator. I never actually worried about who that would be. It's by far, hands down, very important because there's a lot of liabilities that come with that, and ensuring the production, that's a huge component as to who that person's going to be, right? Because the chance for injury with what we were doing is really high. Like in the fight scenes, the stunts they were doing in there, there's a great risk for injury if you don't know what you're doing. For some reason, I just never worried about it. I just figured the right person was always going to show up. I was actually more concerned about who was going to be our stunt double for our lead because I was looking at her at the time like it's going to be hard to match her kind of framework looking at all the stunt actresses that are like available right now. I was more concerned about that. But turns out our fight and stunt coordinator found out this film was happening and he just reached out, introduced himself. "I'm so and so, my name is Wayne Wells, and I heard you're doing this film, and I'd love to talk to you about it." And in Canada, he happens to be one of the top fight and stunt coordinators with one of the best records in the industry. He and I spoke on day one. I knew that was our guy. And again, the chemistry was there with him where when he knew how we needed to pivot, he also, keep in mind, these women were training. They had a choreographed routine. They trained, they knew when they got in a cage, they were going to do this, all of that whole script thrown out the door. All of a sudden, they had to pivot too. Our fight and stunt coordinator had to pivot, and they had to pivot every single scene that they were doing just because of the time that we had, the pressure we were under, and the capability to do what we were doing. So, having that as a director on the creative side made all the difference because we literally could telecommunicate with each other. It's like we knew what had to get done, we understood the task, and we just kind of handled it, right? On the producing side, again, it's almost the same type. I also co-produce with my wife, who is another one who, again, when I talk about a team that operates under pressure, just, all you see is diamonds all around you, right? When the pressure's on. And sometimes I think that creates a certain kind of energy, which creates a certain type of product. But on the producing side, it was almost the same thing. It's, hey, okay, we have a lot of logistical challenges right now. And how are we compensating for this? How do we, again, COVID, okay, everything got thrown out the door. What we were going to do in terms of our post-production plan, the world is changing, the industry's changing. How do we evolve right now with this? Because otherwise, we're not getting this done. Because our plan just got, again, just like production, just got thrown out the door. So on the producing side, we had to be able to pivot too fast in real time and just stay updated with all the changes that were happening so quickly. Just amazing to me when I think about all the changes over 4 years. And that made all the difference. And that was on the producing side, if you want to call it the business side, to be able to get the product to market, right? Made all the difference. And planning the festival runs that we had to promote the film, market the film, support the distributors, that was, again, like a team. And it wasn't conflict in a team, it was a team working in perfect cohesion together. And ultimately, I'd say the success of the film was comes right back down to the team. And that's what I meant by it.
So like when you work on like a film project, sometimes like you said, like some people have creative differences. How do you handle that?
Me personally, I always look at myself as a collaborator. I like to collaborate with everyone, not just as a director, but also as a producer. But at the same token, you take the feedback, you take everything, and you make the best decision that you can at the time, right? It's not always the case on every movie set or every company. I've seen many sets where directors have lost their cool. I've seen sets where actors aren't even talking to the directors, or the directors aren't talking to producers. There's all kinds of conflict and issues coming up. And essentially, as a producer, one of the roles is to be able to handle conflict. Get everybody sit down, compromise. Let's agree to not agree or agree to agree. And what's the best way to move forward to try to get the best end result that we can for the project? So a lot of times you almost have to take it back to the greater good. What's the greater good here? What's the bigger mission? What are we working on? What are we working towards? You're not going to satisfy everybody's ego. So usually, okay, just have to take it back. What are we doing here? Why are we here? And let's look at the big picture, and then let's work our way back a little bit and see if we can resolve whatever is going on, right?
How do you view like success today compared to, many years ago in your younger self?
How would I view it today, just to understand the question correctly, versus maybe how I would have looked at it 20 years ago? The thing when you talk about 20 plus years ago, and I don't think it's changed much today when you're 18, 19, 20, you think you already know everything. So that already in and of itself is a little bit of an issue, because back then, even for me, I felt like I was measuring success more with the monetary returns. It's if this venture worked and it made money, it was obviously a success, right? But I realized many years later that's not necessarily how you want to measure success, right? Sometimes you can go into something and make money and it's still a total disaster, and you can almost call it an unsuccessful venture, right? And vice versa. You can go into a project where you didn't make money, it was a disaster, but it was a total success. And so I can look at productions slightly before EFC 2 or 3 that, yeah, I would have said they were a little bit of a disaster, because obviously we couldn't complete it for whatever the reason was, whether it was a decision or whatever the case was. However, they weren't, because the experience obviously transferred over into the film that it needed to, which was EFC. And since we're talking about that, along the way, you find the people that you want to work with, the teams that you're going to build, right? The people you're going to be working with for the next 10, 15 years. And a lot of times you don't know who those people are until you're going through some of those types of scenarios when it's not going well and it's all crazy and it's pandemonium. And that's a lot of times where you do find your team, because you know how you're going to respond, how you work together, if you can depend on the person or not, right? So that's essential, right? Going through those experiences. So how I look at it differently now is different than 20 years ago because I don't gauge it by a monetary result at all. I think every experience, every project is rich with its own unique thing. And sometimes you have very specific goals that you want to accomplish, and I will take that into consideration. But in everything, it's was I able to take something out of this that I can bring to the next thing? And if you can answer yes, then it was a very successful type of a situation. Or the other scenario I like to ask is that as a result of whatever this venture or project or whatever it was, did it get me to the point where I could do something different than what I've done before? Just as a result of the experience, the knowing, the understanding. And if that's a yes, then I know it's a success, right? Somebody listening to this podcast right now, if they listen to this and by the time they get to the end, they think about it and they wake up tomorrow morning and they do something like different than what they would have done if they didn't listen to this podcast. Daniel, I know you and we did something right and this was an absolute success. And that's only one person. Maybe it's me, maybe it's you, or it could be anyone else, but I know it was an absolute success, right? So I do look at it different because I don't judge things by monetary success anymore. Just because something had a monetary success, I realized doesn't mean it was a or it doesn't mean it was a success at all.
So, I mean, now that you've done, EFC and all these other projects, I mean, what do you have any thoughts? I mean, about any future projects you share with us?
Yes, we have a lot going on. So EFC dropped last year. We have another film that was shot across Europe called Let Go. That one's a psychological thriller that will be out in 2026. Again, it's another independent film that had its challenges. Different for me because on that production, I'm one of the executive producers. It had a different director who was brilliant in the filmmaking, and that's coming out next year, but we have to do all the same things. It's before it goes into commercial distribution, you plan the marketing as a producer. And so it has a film festival circuit it's going to go through first before it gets into the distribution phase. And then once it gets into distribution, it's got another life cycle that it runs through. But that's immediately up next. You'll be hearing lots about that come September called Let Go. We have another short film as well that's on the heels of that called Starry Eyed, which again I was a producer on. We're focused on our slate of films, which the next two are sci fi thrillers. Genesis is probably the movie that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and we have been building towards, and that revolves around original thought theory as well. We have another one right behind it called Monopoly, which is more about the collapse of the monetary system and the future of money for the most part. We have what I feel as though is a stellar slate of projects that we're making a quantum leap to because those projects are at a macro level scale. But that was always the plan, right? We've had a plan from 2015, and that was always the plan, was to quantum leap into more of a macro level scale with those projects. When you see them, I call them Nolan level. When you see them in the next few years and people listening, I hope they remember it didn't just happen, snap of a finger. We woke up overnight and all of a sudden it happened. We've been planning from 2015, 2015, and and it's 2025 now. That's 10 years. By the time Genesis comes out, that's still probably 3 years from now. So now we're 18 years. And I'm saying that was the film that I've always wanted to do because it's the story I've been wanting to tell. It's at the macro level that we wanted to get at. It's a $30 million production. And when it's seen, it will represent that, but it didn't happen. Just woke up one night and it just happened. Or we just came out with the film and then we got lucky. I try to tell filmmakers, you really need to sit and map your own stuff out, because the days where, I mean, I'm sure there's people where somebody's going to come knocking, but the world's changed, the industry's changed, and you have to be so hands-on now, and you have to have multiple hats. You've got to be the filmmaker that can produce, see things through from concept to fruition. That's where the hole in the industry is, and that's the demand, for the future.
Is there anything behind the scenes, anything that you can share with us about EFC on this podcast that maybe how we can exclusively share about, or that's not possible?
Behind the scenes, there was so many things that happened behind the scenes. Where do you even start?
Are there anything like exclusive or special that you can share with the audience to get people interested in watching it?
I'll tell you this, the fight scenes. So I'm the director, of course. I'm working with our fight and stunt coordinator, and I'm looking at the fight scenes in real time. We're shooting them, we're cutting, they're doing this, they're doing that. But me sitting there as a director, I'm watching this, and to me, it looks so real to me that I'm sitting there concerned. I see girls bleeding. I'm like, oh my God, do we have an insurance issue right now? And very concerned, because I would go to the fight coordinator. I think once I went to him, I said, hey, are they really hitting each other? Because it looks like they're actually hitting each other right now. I see you so and so bleeding right now. Because it's like the women went to war, right? They were coming out of there with bruises, and just it was all done in a very safe environment, right? But you could still like see the impact and the hits, right? It was just, so for me, I don't know if that's an interesting enough story for people to get them interested to see it. As a director of the film, I'm sitting there, I know what's going on. Obviously, like, we planned so many things in conjunction with the stunt team and our camera teams and stuff like that. I know what to expect. But I'm still sitting there in a director's chair. Slightly, maybe I had my producer's hat on at the time, looking at this. Are they really hitting each other right now? Walking up to our stunt. Are they hitting each other for real? Because, we can't afford any insurance issues here. Is she really bleeding right now? Because I don't remember having prosthetic blood on, right? And they're like, no, that's real blood. And I'm like, oh my God. So the fight scenes, I think, do look real in the movie, because essentially it was done in a very realistic way that even for me in a director's chair, knowing what I know, obviously I'm the director, I'm still looking at it in front of my eyes, wondering, are they really hitting each other right now? Are they really bleeding? Where's that blood coming from? We didn't have prosthetics on this one. Is that real blood? Is that what's I don't know if that's an interesting tidbit, but I always laugh. I was laughing when I saw the film, because I was really proud of how those fight scenes actually came out. For a women's MMA fight scene, I knew that we can get a lot of things wrong. We could fail in some areas, but being one of the first, I knew we had to do that, and I'm glad that we got it right, when you look at some of those fight scenes. Other tidbits, you might have to throw some topics at me.
I think what you mentioned is good.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody had a question, Jaze, about our conversation today, or they're interested in collaborating with you, what are the best ways they can reach out to you?
Easy to find at Jaze Bordeaux across all social media platforms. Doesn't matter if it's X, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, or whatever, or my website might be the easiest, jazbordeaux.com. No problem. If they want to know more about EFC, they can follow it anywhere online. A quick Google search, EFC movie, or they can find it across all social platforms at EFC movie. But if they find me, they'll find all our projects that we're working on, including, again, the one I mentioned that's coming out soon, Let Go. which is a very excited one. Really excited for that one to come out, and all the future stuff that we're working on, and everything in between.
Well, Jaze, I really enjoyed talking with you, but we're kind of coming into the podcast. Do you have any final words to show the audience before we wrap up our conversation today?
In lieu of everything that we talked about, the one thing I guess I'll come back to, because we mentioned it before, I hope for whoever's listening that tomorrow or later you'll wake up or come to a point where there was something you were able to take from this today and do something different than what you did yesterday. And if that's the case, then Daniel, we did really well today.
Jaze, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing about your experiences with EFC and everything else you've been working on. It was definitely very interesting, to say the least. I know we can probably talk for a few more hours. Unfortunately, we have to narrow down the podcast to about an hour, and we kind of already went over that a little bit, but I think it was worth doing that. But thank you so much for giving us a little bit of peek into the film industry world. It was very enlightening, very thought-provoking, and I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and experiences with our audience today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on the show, and look forward to recapping this with you too.